What's happening, everybody? Is Mark Pope going to be the next head coach at Kentucky? Certainly looking that way. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along on today's show. Did the Kentucky search come to an end with BYU's Mark Pope? I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to Everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, let's dive right into it because, man, so many questions, so many what the heck is happening, and nobody better to jump in and talk all about it than our buddy Jacob Hatch. He hosts Locked On Cougars, talking all things BYU. He's been covering Mark Pope, coaching some college games there at BYU the last handful of years. And Mark, how the heck are you? What do you make of this news that Kentucky, all these big names, we heard Dan Hurley and Scott Drew and all these big names, that your guy at BYU might be their new head coach?
Well, Chris, thanks for having me. It's good to be on Locked On SEC. I've made it as far as Locked On Big 12, so it's good to be in the southeastern part of the country finally. But nonetheless, you're right. Crazy times out here in Provo. Mark Pope has been the head coach of BYU for quite a while now. I actually covered him way back when he was the head coach at UVU, so I've got nearly a decade of having watched him work his magic as both an assistant and a head coach. So bit of a crazy time out here as it appears he is headed, quote-unquote, home to Kentucky because obviously he was a team captain of that 1996 national championship squad under Rick Pitino.
Yeah, and let's get everybody caught up on the latest. Matt Norlander, as of 8:30 Thursday evening, tweeting out breaking news: Kentucky has lined up BYU's Mark Pope to be its next head coach, according to CBS Sports. Nothing signed at this hour, but the sides are quickly working toward a deal and hope to get it done by the end of the night. Pete Thamel saying the same thing. So this is multiple sources, and this seems very real. Now, I can't help but bring up, Jacob, we had a similar incident in the SEC a few months ago when Texas A&M moved on from Jimbo Fisher. There were reports that they were going to hire Mark Stoops as the next head coach at A&M. Now, something happened in the hours after that news leaked out where the big money boosters all intervened, said, not no, but hell no, we're not hiring Mark Stoops. And they end up, going another direction. I wonder if that could happen here in this time that we're recording this podcast. We'll see. But for argument's sake, tell us a little bit about Mark Pope. Like you said, member of that Kentucky championship team in 96, but who is he as a head coach? What's his style? What's been the expectations? What was BYU before he got there? Let's start there.
Well, BYU's had a pretty interesting history basketball-wise. Dave Rose had been in his position for 15 years, and Mark Pope was his assistant before going over to UVU, Utah Valley University, to take over as the head coach of UVU. Really turned around UVU's program, actually came back to BYU and beat them a couple of times as the head coach of UVU. And then ultimately when Dave Rose stepped down from his position, it was a no-brainer to bring Mark Pope back over. It's literally a 3-mile journey down the road to go back to BYU as head coach. But the one thing that he has proven so far during his time at BYU is he has stepped up to every challenge that BYU has faced. Obviously, he was their head coach when they were in the West Coast Conference, but this past year, BYU joined the Big 12, and they were picked 13th out of 14 teams in the preseason poll. And I'll be honest, I was along with the rest of the BYU fans out there thinking, okay, that's a pretty decent bet for them to be in that spot. But the one thing that he proved is he can coach his butt off. That's the one thing he did. He finished 5th in the Big 12 this year, tied with Kansas in terms of overall conference record. Now, they did get upset in the NCAA tournament in the first round in a very disappointing upset loss to Duquesne. So that left a bitter taste in the mouth of BYU fans. But he has proven that he can rise to the occasion wherever he's been a head coach so far. But this is another level. This is going from the Big 12 to the SEC and going to what I consider to be the bluest of the blue blood basketball programs in the Kentucky Wildcats. But the one thing I know about Mark is this is his absolute dream job. There were not many places he was going to leave BYU to go coach. Kentucky was right at the top, and once he was given that opportunity, and let's be honest, it could still fall apart because you mentioned the Mark Stoops situation with A&M. It still could fall apart, but Mark Pope will do everything within his power to secure this job because it is truly his dream position.
How much did he ever talk about his time at Kentucky? Did he ever talk about being a champion? I mean, how much did he ever bring that up?
If you brought it up, he's happy to talk about it. There's actually a pretty famous video that's been floating around the interwebs today of him. This goes back to his early run at BYU, his early years there, and there was some alumni event of the '96 team that they were honoring, and he ripped off a shirt and a jacket to reveal the jersey he wore actually when he was at Kentucky, and said, "Hey, I wish I could be there with you guys tonight to celebrate." It was something about commemorating that team, but he has been very vocal about his time playing for Rick Pitino at Kentucky and how transformative it was. And the one thing I know about Mark is if Kentucky does pull through on this hire and brings him down there, the one thing Mark will bring is energy to that job. Because like I said, this is the position he has craved to have for many, many years. And I'm expecting him to hit the ground running. Now, the biggest concern is his postseason record is not great. It's 0-for. He has gone 0-for in his postseason career as a head coach. So that is going to be a red flag, I think, for a lot of Big Blue Nation. But the biggest thing is that he has to go down there and win that press conference. The one thing I know about Mark Pope, having sat into many of those press conferences, he will absolutely have Kentucky fans and Kentucky media eating out of his hand. That's just how he operates.
Yeah, I heard you'd referenced that earlier about, he's going to win the press conference. Is he one of those likable guys, like a guy that you meet, you talk to, and you just go, man, this guy's so damn likable. How can I not root for him?
That's exactly how he is. And he's got an effervescent personality. He's always upbeat, always positive. And he is going to make sure that if he, like you said, ultimately lands this job, he is going to be very vocal about his love for Kentucky, his love for Lexington, and wanting to bring back postseason success to Big Blue Nation. And you can guarantee that he will do everything within his power to sell Kentucky fans and Kentucky media, whoever else is involved in that program. He's going to absolutely go about making sure that they know that he loves that university and he is there to win and win big.
Comes from Utah Valley and BYU.
Mm-hmm.
What's he like as a recruiter? And I don't even know if we can question, because it's like, I don't know what expectations are for recruiting at a BYU, but like, what you know about him? What's he like as a recruiter?
Well, I'll tell you this. He's done a very good job in the transfer portal. Jackson Robinson was a guy that he plucked out of the portal and has transformed Jackson Robinson in the last 2 years into an NBA prospect. Ali Khalifa was in the top 10 in the nation in terms of assist to turnover ratio as a 6'11" center this past year. He found him at Charlotte last year and brought him in to BYU. So he uses the transfer portal to a very high degree, but he's also done a fairly good job at mining the high school ranks out here in Utah in the Intermountain West. He's got a number of athletes that he has either committed and or signed that have been key parts of his program. The one thing I know about Mark is he's not afraid to chase anybody. BYU's got some unique situations about their recruiting profile, being a church-affiliated school. You obviously have a high academic standard you have to meet when you come to BYU. And there's also an honor code that they make every student and athlete sign that they have to abide by when they go to school here that prohibits premarital sex, drinking alcohol, and a lot of the things that, let's put it away, young men like to do in their college years. But that's a no-go at BYU. He embraced all of that and put together a fairly solid basketball program, even with all of those restrictions. With some of those quote-unquote shackles off of him, I think he could do a very, very good job at Kentucky. But once again, it is another step up in terms of the overall pressure and the overall need to get top-level talent. I am wondering if he's going to be able to go out there and consistently put together the type of recruiting classes that Coach Calipari, speaking of John Calipari, was able to put together every single year.
Yeah, it's man, we talk about sexy hires, and it's not the sexiest of hires, but
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, when Scott Drew's on that list, Nate Oates was on that list. You look at, there was talk about Danny Hurley on that list. You know what? Mark Pope, yeah, he is not the headliner on that list, but the whole situation out here in Provo, when this job came open, was that Mark Pope wanted this job, but I think everybody understood that there was going to have to be some people that passed on the opportunity before he got his shot. Well, that played out, and it appears that he sold Mitch Barnhart and whoever else at Kentucky holds the power in making those hires, and he is apparently on his way to winning that job.
Hold that thought, Jake, because I just have a few more questions for you. I want to talk about X's and O's and a few more. More with Jake Hatch here in just a second. Locked on Cougars, talking all things BYU on Mark Pope, possibly the new head coach at Kentucky. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth here in just a sec. But first, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience The winning formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors got everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, superchargers, whatever it is you need for your car. Maybe it's just wiper blades. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You're always going to find exactly what it is you're looking for. And with that eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Again, whatever it is you're looking for, go check it out. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. One more time, it is ebaymotors.com. As we dive back into it with Jake Hatch, host of Locked On Cougars, covering the BYU Cougars, and Mark Pope, who, according to reports, very well could be the next head coach. Pete Thamel tweeting it out Thursday night as well, that Kentucky's targeting Mark Pope to be the school's next coach. Let's talk a little bit about his style, because let's be real. X's and O's the last few years, maybe not Coach John Calipari's biggest asset. Kentucky fans were getting tired of it, and a lot of early round exits. Give me the idea, what style of play does Mark Pope run?
Well, it's kind of an NBA style, and that's what he ran this past year, the first year in the Big 12 Conference. It was a lot of three-pointers. BYU had a stated goal every game last season of shooting north of 30 three-pointers in a game. Now, I will acknowledge this. BYU used it in terms of overcoming some athletic deficiencies going up against Big 12 teams, because let's be honest, BYU is not the most athletic team in the entire world. That's just how it's going to be in the Big 12 Conference for the Cougars. So they need to do something a little different. But one thing I know that he will take to Kentucky is that mentality. Either you go to the rim and score at the rim, or you shoot a three. They're all about these metrics. He is a guy who is very much bought into looking at numbers, analyzing them, and essentially going by what the numbers say. And it's kind of what the NBA's gone to. Either you score at the rim, the mid-range game is not efficient. They don't like it. And that's what BYU has kind of operated under with him as the head coach. What I am looking forward to is seeing how he will adapt that with higher level athletes that he will absolutely have access to at Kentucky, and see how he morphs it a little bit. But I can tell you that he is a guy that is going to be very innovative on offense. He had Cahill Fennell, who was just recently hired as UT Rio Grande Valley's head coach, as his defensive coordinator, as they called it this past year. And they really were all over the place on defense. They would possession by possession switch defenses, 2-3 zone, a 1-3-1 zone, matchup zones. They'd go to man-to-man if they needed to. And that actually yielded a very nice turnaround in terms of the defensive metrics for BYU this past season as well. So what I can say about Mark Pope is he is very adaptable to making sure that his system, whether it's offense or defense, is adapted to who he has on his roster.
So it sounds like to me you're saying, in-game adjustments, pretty good at that. What about final play? How is he getting the chalkboard and drawing up a final play?
That's where I have a bit of a question. Those after timeout plays, they have not been necessarily the most elite. In my experience, having covered BYU, there were moments that he had, absolutely. And I'm sure that he has ideas of what he'd like to run in certain sets. And like I said, having a higher level of athlete at Kentucky should yield maybe some better results and some new plays that he can run with the Wildcats. But the one thing is his track record with it a little bit spotty with after the timeout or end of game scenarios. And that'll be one thing he's going to have to prove that he can be capable of with the Wildcats.
Yeah, it's just, this is still just all this, it's still trying to sink in for me.
Oh, trust me. Out here in Provo, it's like a shock and awe factor, because the thought was that it was going to be Mark Pope was going to be in the mix for this, but nobody expected it to come to fruition this quickly. So it is not really settled in out here in Utah either. But like I said, this is Mark Pope's absolute dream job, and he will. Well, I'll put it this way: he was willing to do essentially anything to get this gig if it was presented to him as an opportunity.
Yeah, I saw one tweet. Somebody said, they said, not a surprising move after some of the big names turned Kentucky down. Kentucky needed to act quick, and Pope is a former player who knows the expectations of the program. I mean, look, I think most people know the expectations at Kentucky, right? You don't have to have played there to know them. So last thing I'll ask you, Jake, is kind of, all right, I'm sure a lot of Kentucky fans are watching this going, this is an F- hire. This is the worst hire we ever could have made. So give them some reassurance here. What's the, what if you had to speak to those people, give them an idea of like, hey, it's going to be fine, or hey, you might be right. What would you tell them?
Well, here's the thing. Mark has done a very good job in both of his head coaching stints. UVU was very much a rebuilding project, and he did a very good job rebuilding that program. I've got a thought that if he had stuck around at UVU maybe a couple of seasons beyond what he ended up staying, he probably would have had them make the NCAA tournament at some point. He has made the NCAA tournament twice at BYU. The 2020 season that got canceled, the COVID tournament, BYU had a squad that year that he had compiled that I thought could make a run in that NCAA tournament. It's a shame that it ultimately got canceled because they were absolutely balling at the end of that season. It felt like they were poised to do something special. So he has proven in both head coaching since so far that he's going to put together a competitive program. Yes, competitive is not good enough for Kentucky. I'm fully aware of that. They want national championships. They want Final Fours. And his career track record, once again, is over when it comes to postseason success. But I can tell you, and talking with people about this hire and just the interest level of Mark Pope and Kentucky and vice versa, was that there were a number of Kentucky alumni, I should say, that were promoting Mark because he was considered to be one of the heart and soul guys of that 1996 national championship squad. And Rick Pitino, now at St. John's, has been very quick. Whenever Mark has been interested or rumored to be up for a job, the conversations I've had with folks is that Rick has been very quick to endorse his former team captain there at Kentucky. So I'm assuming that held some sway over Mitch Barnhart. I do know that Mark has a relationship with their AD, Mitch Barnhart, down there in Lexington. I'm sure that helped with this situation. So give Mark a chance. Like I said, he's going to win the press conference. He's a guy who is absolutely gregarious. He is going to glad hand with everybody. He will absolutely kiss babies, shake hands, do whatever he has to do to ingratiate himself to Big Blue Nation. But the big question mark is he's going to have a competitive team in the regular season. And I know the Kentucky fans the last 2 years with those first round exits under Coach Cal, they want to see Kentucky get back to being a national powerhouse. And that is the big question mark I still have about Mark Pope.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. There's a lot of angry Kentucky fans out there, but you're right. Sometimes you just have to give a guy a chance and see sink or swim. And he's got to have the best resources in the world. And let's see what he does with it. If he recruits well and they play well, who knows? Maybe the sky's the limit. And he's only 51. I mean, this is a guy who could be there 15 years if it all works out well and build a dynasty there at Kentucky. So we'll see if that happens. He is Jake Hatch, host of Locked On Cougars, covered all things BYU. Jake, I never thought we'd have you on Locked On SEC, but yet here we are. Appreciate the time, man. Can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me, hit me up.
All right, there he is. That's Jake Hatch, and appreciate him taking some time. All right, when we return here, we'll give you some more thoughts. We'll talk about what transpired earlier in the day on Thursday with some coaches saying no, and then, of course, John Calipari was introduced over at Arkansas the other day. We'll hit on that as well. More Locked On SEC coming your way here in just a sec. But first, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down closer to first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime is going to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They got flash deals. You could save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. They got zone deals. You could save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you. I've used them before. I've used them for NFL games. Super easy to use. And like I said, the view from the seat, awesome, because it literally shows you what your view looks like. And when you get there and you sit in your seat, that's exactly what the view is. And again, the all-in price, no hidden fees. You just hit all in price. The price that they show you, that's what the total is going to be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Go download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege. That'll get you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. It is last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, Locked On SEC. Thanks so much again to Jake Hatch for joining us. And man, what a wild evening, Thursday evening, as we're catching up on the news that Kentucky is reportedly, again, Matt Norlander, the first to have it. Breaking news that Kentucky lined up BYU's Mark Pope to be their next head coach, according to CBS Sports. He said nothing signed at the hour, but the sides are working quickly toward a deal and hope to get it done by the end of the evening. Even John Rothstein jumping in and saying Kentucky is closing in on hiring BYU's Mark Pope. Aaron Torres, Fox Sports, saying, I have a take. I don't hate the hiring of Mark Pope as head coach. I think there's a chance he's good, but you can hire Mark Pope in a week, a month, or 2 years. At that point, you have to wait out Billy Donovan, circle back with Pope when the NBA season is done. Maybe they didn't want to do that. Aaron Torres even saying, credit Mitch Barnhart, may have run the worst coaching search I've ever seen. You get turned down by a guy you've promised your fan base for years. Hail Mary to the best coach in the game who will never say yes. A panic hire, someone you could have gotten in a week. This was a masterclass. Again, people pretty critical of this hire. Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio saying, honestly, don't know what to say. I like Mark Pope as a person. If it comes together, it's not the hire I would have made. So, again, a lot of people kind of critical of the move, and, a lot of Kentucky fans unhappy. And so that's where I kind of threw out the comparison of, will this deal get to the finish line is the question, because there was a lot of hype and excitement. We started Wednesday or Thursday rather with Kentucky kind of had let Scott Drew of Baylor kind of sleep on it. They, they had kind of thrown out the offers out there to Dan Hurley of UConn and Scott Drew of Baylor. And, there was obviously reports for several days that there was mutual interest there. But on Thursday, reports indicated Scott Drew had entertained the offer to Kentucky, and reports were that he slept on it and put out a program and said, in our program here at Baylor, we strive to put Jesus first, then others, then ourselves. We truly believe God has called my family and I to continue our work here at Baylor, surrounded by the best people and community anyone could be blessed to have. So, Scott Drew turns him down and says, we are sticking here at Baylor. And, some people say, like, if you prayed on it and God said you're staying at Baylor, can't really argue with that. How do you, do you go back to God and say, hey, Kentucky's up their offer? You can't really argue with that. And then, of course, later in the day on Thursday, CBS Sports' Matt Norlander reported that Dan Hurley was a firm no. That source told Norlander there would be a 0% chance he would leave UConn to take the Kentucky job. And look, he's got a good thing going at UConn. He just won back-to-back national championships. He's got a great staff. He's dominating in that conference. Yeah, it's a big step up to go to the SEC and have to go play tougher competition where you're facing Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl and all these great coaches night in and night out. Oh, by the way, John Calipari still in the SEC over at Arkansas now. So it's a tough job. But Matt Jones had reported that Drew Hurley and Billy Donovan were the three names that on their top tier list of candidates. And the reality is with Billy Donovan in the NBA, season is coming to an end here this weekend, but there will be the postseason. And, does Donovan even have interest in going back to college? He's a guy that, coached at Florida, won those back-to-back championships 15 years ago. So, there's a lot of things there. And so you wonder, did they maybe get some vibes? Maybe Billy Donovan's agent reached out and said, guys, look, he's not coming. He's staying in the NBA. So if you struck out on those three, on top of Nate Oates, saying I'm staying in Alabama, Jay Wright saying, I like the TV gig. I left Villanova to get out of coaching. I don't want to get back into coaching. The other names out there, Rick Pitino's name was thrown out there. There was a report that said they didn't even entertain that. But Mark Pope is a name that was down on the list. But, if all these people started telling no, how far did you go down the list? I mean, I still threw out Bruce Pearl at Auburn. I mean, it was a possibility. And, I even think Will Wade from LSU and McNeese would have been a good hire. Like, he's a guy who has at least a good X's and O's coach who's recruited well, and his biggest crime was paying players. Well, that's legal now. So, but Mark Pope emerged as a potential candidate this week, and now according to several reports, is going to be or is finalizing a deal to become the next Kentucky head coach. And so, again, a lot of Kentucky fans not going to be happy with it. And I get it, right? I mean, even Sean Miller's name was thrown out there from Xavier. Like, if you're a Kentucky fan, would you have rathered Sean Miller? Would you have rathered Bruce Pearl? Would you have rathered Rick Pitino coming back over Mark Pope? Again, he's 51. He's done a good job there at BYU as far as winning games. Just hasn't had the postseason success. And that is what, Kentucky fans pride themselves on, is the postseason success. That's why they were ready to move on from Calipari initially before they reaffirmed, we're not going to pay your $30 million buyout. We're going to stand by you. But speaking of Cal, he was introduced the other night at Arkansas Wednesday evening, talking with the media, said he wants to build something special at Arkansas. The AD 100 check spoke glowingly about him. And the first thing Arkansas is going to need is a roster. Cal joked, saying, I met with the team. There is no team. But reports are he's got $5 million to spend in NIL. Look, if you got that, you can build the team. The Tyson Foods money will buy you a team for $5 million. But it was weird watching Cal in red for once and not blue. And, the Hog faithful, very excited. And Cal said all the right things. He said he doesn't have a magic wand, but he said he grinds out results over the course of a season in an effort to improve his players. And, maybe they'll get some big time recruits to come in there. Maybe some of the kids who had committed to him at Kentucky, they flip over and come over to Arkansas. But it's quite the contrast right now, where Arkansas fans are super ecstatic about John Calipari, and Kentucky fans are going, what in the world? Why are we hiring Mark Pope? And again, it's no knock on him. Mark Pope seems to be a real good guy, and Jake Hatch told us, he's a guy that this is his dream job. But there's a lot of Kentucky fans saying fire Mitch Barnhart right now. That Mitch Barnhart's got to go. And the rumor was he was going to be retiring soon anyway. So it's almost like if that was going to be your move, you want this to be your lasting legacy? You want this to be the last hire you make as athletic director? And look, they've done a great job. You could argue the women just made it a higher light years better. Kenny Brooks has had some great success there at Virginia Tech, and he's now their women's coach. But Mark Pope, now reportedly going to be the next head coach at Kentucky. And I get why Kentucky fans not super ecstatic about it. But we'll see. Again, if he can win, they will learn to love him. And I'll just say one other thing. A lot of people talk about, nobody gets their number one target anymore. Chris Vanini had a great post. He basically said, look, we've had two of the biggest jobs in sports open up here in the last couple months. We had Alabama football open up and Kentucky football or Kentucky basketball. And neither of them got the number one name on their list, right? I mean, Alabama came out and was like, you weren't going to get Kirby Smart, wasn't going to leave Georgia. You weren't going to get, Steve Sarkisian was very quick to put out a statement. I'm staying at Texas. Mike Norvell, Florida State was on the list. He came out very quickly and said, I'm staying here. Now on paper, Kalen DeBoer looks like a good hire, right? Despite lack of ties to the SEC in the South. But we'll see if that ends up being the right hire. But, I mentioned to somebody yesterday, when Nick Saban left LSU in 2004, one of the top names on LSU's list was Steve Spurrier. They ended up settling on Les Miles. A lot of people were not excited about it. They said, the Oklahoma State coach? 3 years later, he wins the national championship at LSU. Won a lot of games at LSU. Played for another championship. So, sometimes the best hire isn't always, or the right hire isn't always the guy that you have at the top of your list. And go look at coaching searches nowadays in football and basketball. How many schools ever get the number one name on their list? Rarely ever now. The only other one I can remember was Ohio State when they got Urban Meyer. And that one worked out. He won a title there. But, more often than not, when coaching searches happen nowadays, you don't get the first or second or third name on your list. You quote unquote settle for the fourth or fifth name. And a lot of times that guy ends up being the right guy, ends up being a good hire. So we'll see if indeed by the time we get through all this, you guys may be watching this right now and saying, why'd you spend so much time on Mark Pope? It didn't go through, whatever. But as of now, as this recording, Mark Pope going to be the new guy at Kentucky, and underwhelming to say the least. And we'll leave it there. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Come on back Monday. We'll be recapping all the action from the weekend of spring games, 6 spring games to recap, I think it is. Right. We'll recap them all on Monday right here on Locked On SEC. Hey, for your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports Today. Has launched the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today. Search for it there, and you will get caught up on all the latest news, all the top stories of the day from around the sports world. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys on Monday.